The afternoon sun was starting to dip lower in the sky when 16-year-old David picked up his gym bag and headed out of the community center. His basketball practice had run longer than usual today. Coach Williams had kept the team working on defensive drills until everyone was dripping with sweat. David's legs felt heavy as he walked, but it was a good kind of tired. The kind that came from pushing yourself and knowing you'd gotten better. He pulled his team hoodie over his head and started walking home. Most of his teammates got rides from their parents or took the bus, but David actually enjoyed the walk. It gave him time to think about the game coming up on Friday and whether he'd remember all those new plays they'd been practicing. The route home took him through Oakwood Heights, one of the nicer neighborhoods in town. The houses here were bigger than most, with perfectly cut grass and fancy cars in the driveways. David had been walking this same path for 3 years now, ever since his family moved to the area. His dad had gotten a big promotion at work, and they'd been able to afford a house just a few blocks away from where David was walking now. He knew some people might think it was strange for a black teenager to be walking through this neighborhood. But David had never really thought about it much. This was his neighborhood too, even if some of the houses were fancier than his family's place. He'd helped Mrs. Chen next door with her groceries plenty of times, and Mr. Rodriguez down the street always waved when David jogged past in the mornings. Today felt different, though. Maybe it was because he was more tired than usual, or maybe it was because there weren't many people around. The street seemed quieter somehow. Most of the garage doors were closed, and he could see the flicker of television screens through a few windows. It was that time of day when people were inside making dinner or helping kids with homework. David shifted his gym bag to his other shoulder and kept walking. Inside the bag were his basketball shoes, still damp with sweat, a water bottle, and the math homework he'd been meaning to finish. His mom would probably ask about that homework the minute he walked through the door. She was always on top of his grades, making sure he understood that basketball was great, but education came first. His phone buzzed in his pocket. A text from his best friend Tyler asking if he wanted to hang out later. David smiled and typed back that he'd call after dinner. Tyler lived across town, in a neighborhood that looked a lot more like where David used to live before the move. Sometimes David missed the old place. Things had felt simpler there. People knew each other better and nobody looked twice when you walked down the street. As he walked, David noticed a woman across the street. She was standing in her front yard, but she wasn't doing yard work or getting her mail. She was just standing there, and it seemed like she was looking in his direction. David glanced over briefly, then kept walking. Maybe she was waiting for someone to come home. The woman was probably in her 40s with blonde hair pulled back in a ponytail. She was wearing workout clothes like she'd been exercising, but she wasn't moving around. She was just standing there watching. David felt a little uncomfortable but tried to shake off the feeling. People stood in their yards all the time. There was nothing weird about it. He was about halfway through the neighborhood when he noticed the woman was walking now. She was on the opposite sidewalk, going in the same direction he was going. That was probably just a coincidence. Maybe she was out for an evening walk. Lots of people in this neighborhood walked for exercise. David's house wasn't too much farther now. Just a few more blocks and he'd be home. His mom was probably already starting dinner. Wednesday was usually taco night and David's stomach growled thinking about it. All that running around at practice had made him hungry. He pulled out his phone to check the time. Almost 6 o'clock. His dad would be getting home from work soon, too. His father worked long hours, but he always tried to make it home for dinner with the family. David respected that about his dad. The man worked hard to provide for them, and he never let the stress show when he was home. He was always interested in hearing about David's day, about school, about basketball. The woman was still walking behind him on the other side of the street. David tried not to look over at her, but he could sense she was there. Maybe she lived farther down and was just heading home like he was. There were plenty of reasonable explanations. He was probably just being paranoid because he was tired. His phone buzzed again. This time it was his mom asking when he'd be home. He texted back that he was about 10 minutes away. She responded with a taco emoji, which made him smile. His mom had only started using emojis recently, and she was pretty proud of herself when she used them correctly. David was thinking about whether he should ask for extra cheese on his tacos when he heard footsteps behind him getting faster. He turned around and saw that the woman had crossed the street. Now she was on his side, maybe half a block behind him. She had her phone out and seemed to be talking to someone. A weird feeling settled in David's stomach. It wasn't exactly fear, but it wasn't comfortable either. He'd never done anything wrong in this neighborhood. He'd never bothered anyone or caused any trouble. But something about the way the woman was acting made him feel like he was being watched, like he was being followed. David decided to test his theory. At the next corner, instead of continuing straight toward home, he turned left. It would take him a little out of his way, but if the woman was just going home, she wouldn't follow him down a different street. But she did follow him. She turned the same corner he did, still talking on her phone. Now David was sure. This woman was following him, and he had no idea why. His heart started beating a little faster, and his grip tightened on his gym bag. All he wanted was to get home to his family and his tacos. He never expected his walk home would turn into something like this. The woman's voice was getting louder now, and David could hear bits of her phone conversation drifting across the street. She was talking fast, sounding worried or upset about something. David tried to focus on just getting home, but it was hard to ignore what was happening behind him. "Yes, I'm following him right now," the woman was saying into her phone. "He's a young black male, maybe 16 or 17. He's wearing a dark hoodie and carrying some kind of bag." David's blood ran cold. She was talking about him. She was actually on the phone with someone, describing him like he was some kind of criminal. But he hadn't done anything wrong. He was just walking home from basketball practice, the same route he'd taken hundreds of times before. He slowed down a little, hoping maybe she would pass him and continue on her way. But instead, the woman slowed down too. She was definitely following him, and she was definitely talking to someone about him on the phone. David's hand started to shake slightly. This was not how he'd imagined his evening going. "He keeps looking around like he's up to something," the woman continued. "I saw him checking out the cars parked on the street, and he tried to test a door handle on one of the houses." David stopped walking completely and turned around. That was a complete lie. He hadn't looked at any cars except to make sure he wasn't walking into traffic. And he definitely hadn't touched anyone's door. He'd been walking on the sidewalk the whole time, just trying to get home. "Excuse me," David called out, trying to keep his voice calm and polite. "Is there some kind of problem?" The woman looked startled that he'd spoken to her. She took a few steps back and spoke louder into her phone. "He's approaching me now. He's trying to intimidate me. Please send someone quickly." "I'm not trying to intimidate anyone," David said, raising his hands to show he wasn't threatening. "I'm just walking home from basketball practice. I live in this neighborhood." But his words seemed to make the woman more upset, not less. She started backing away from him while still talking rapidly into her phone. "He's claiming he lives here, but I've never seen him before. He's getting aggressive with me." David couldn't believe what he was hearing. Aggressive? All he'd done was ask if there was a problem. He was standing still on the sidewalk with his hands visible, holding nothing but his gym bag. If anyone was being aggressive, it was the woman who was following him and making up stories about him. "Ma'am, I'm not being aggressive," David said, trying to sound as calm and respectful as possible. "I understand there might be some confusion, but I really do live here. My family moved to the neighborhood 3 years ago. I walk this way home from school and practice all the time." The woman wasn't listening. She had her phone camera pointed at him now, recording while she continued talking to whoever was on the other end of the call. "I'm recording him now. He won't leave me alone. He keeps making excuses about why he's here." David felt his chest tighten. This was quickly turning into something much bigger than just a misunderstanding. The woman was creating a narrative that painted him as dangerous, and nothing he said seemed to matter. Every word out of his mouth was being twisted into evidence that he was up to no good. "I can call my parents if you want," David offered. "They can confirm that I live here. Or I can just continue walking home and leave you alone." "Don't you dare try to leave," the woman snapped. "The police are on their way, and they're going to want to talk to you about what you've been doing in this neighborhood." Ice. David's stomach dropped. He'd never had any real interaction with police before, except for the friendly officers who sometimes came to school for career day or community events. But he'd heard stories from other kids, other families, stories about situations like this that had gone very wrong very quickly. He pulled out his own phone, thinking he should call his parents. His dad would know what to do. His dad always knew how to handle difficult situations. But before he could dial, the woman started shouting at him again. "Put that phone away. You're not calling your gang friends or whatever. I see what you're trying to do." "It's not gang friends," David said, frustrated now. I was going to call my parents. Look, I don't know what you think I've done, but I promise you I'm just a kid trying to get home from basketball practice. The woman scoffed. Basketball practice, right, is that what they're calling it now? David didn't even know how to respond to that. What did she think basketball practice was code for? He looked down at himself. His team hoodie, his gym bag that clearly had a basketball shape pressed against the side of it, his athletic shoes. Everything about him screamed, teenager coming home from sports practice. But somehow this woman was seeing something completely different. In the distance, David could hear sirens. They were still far away, but they were getting closer. His heart started pounding harder. He'd never been in trouble with the law before. He was a good student, he played sports, he helped out at home. The most rebellious thing he'd ever done was sneak an extra cookie after dinner. Look, David tried one more time. I think there's been a misunderstanding. I'm going to walk home now. My parents are expecting me for dinner. You're not going anywhere, the woman said firmly. Not until the police get here and sort this out. David looked around the neighborhood. A few people had come out of their houses drawn by the commotion. Some were standing on their porches watching from a distance. Others had moved closer, curious about what was happening. David recognized a couple of them. Mrs. Patterson from 2 streets over and the older man who walked his dog every evening around this time. But none of them stepped forward to help. None of them said, "Hey, I know this kid, he lives here." They just watched like it was entertainment. David felt more alone than he'd ever felt in his life. The sirens were getting louder now. David could see flashing lights reflecting off the houses at the end of the street. In just a few minutes, police officers would be here, and David had no idea what was going to happen next. All he'd wanted was to walk home from basketball practice. Now he was standing in the middle of his own neighborhood, being accused of crimes he didn't commit, waiting for police to arrive because a woman had decided he didn't belong here. He thought about his parents at home, probably wondering why he was late for dinner. His mom might be keeping his tacos warm in the oven. His dad might be looking at the clock, wondering if practice had run long again. They had no idea their son was about to have the most difficult conversation of his young life, all because he'd chosen to walk home through the wrong neighborhood on the wrong day. 2 police cars pulled up to the curb, their red and blue lights painting the quiet neighborhood in flashing colors. David's mouth went dry as he watched 2 officers get out of their vehicles. They looked professional and serious as they approached the scene, and David tried to prepare himself for whatever was about to happen. Officer Rodriguez was the first to reach them. He was a middle-aged Hispanic man with kind eyes and a calm demeanor. His partner, Officer Kim, was younger and seemed more tense as she surveyed the situation. Both officers looked between David and the woman, trying to understand what they'd been called to handle. "Good evening," Officer Rodriguez said, addressing both David and the woman. "We received a call about a disturbance. Can someone tell me what's going on here?" The woman immediately launched into her story, speaking rapidly and gesturing toward David. "Officer, thank goodness you're here. This young man has been harassing me and acting suspiciously throughout the neighborhood. I saw him looking into car windows and testing door handles. When I tried to keep an eye on him for everyone's safety, he became confrontational and aggressive with me." David's jaw dropped. The lies were getting bigger and more detailed with each telling. He looked at the officers, hoping they would see how ridiculous the accusations were, but their faces remained neutral and professional as they listened to the woman's version of events. "I see," Officer Rodriguez said, making notes in a small notebook. "And what's your name, ma'am?" "Beverly Mitchell. I live right here on Elm Street. I've been in this neighborhood for 8 months now, and I know who belongs here and who doesn't. I've never seen this boy before in my life." Officer Rodriguez turned to David. "And what's your name, son?" "David Johnson," he replied, trying to keep his voice steady. "I live on Oak Street, about 4 blocks from here. I was walking home from basketball practice at the community center." Beverly scoffed loudly. "Oh, please. Basketball practice. That's what he told me too. Like I was born yesterday." Officer Kim stepped forward, her hand resting casually on her radio. "Do you have any identification with you, David?" David reached slowly into his back pocket and pulled out his school ID card. Officer Rodriguez examined it carefully, comparing the photo to David's face. "This shows you attend Lincoln High School. Is that correct?" "Yes, sir. I'm a junior there. I play on the varsity basketball team." Beverly crossed her arms and shook her head. "Anyone can get a fake ID. That doesn't prove he lives in this neighborhood. Officer Rodriguez looked at Beverly with slight irritation. Ma'am, let's let the young man explain his side of the story. He turned back to David. Can you tell me exactly what happened today? David took a deep breath and started from the beginning. He explained about basketball practice running late, about his walk home through the neighborhood, about noticing Beverly following him. He mentioned that he'd lived in the area for 3 years and walked this route regularly. He's lying, Beverly interrupted. I saw him casing the neighborhood. He was clearly up to no good, and when I tried to protect myself and my neighbors by keeping an eye on him, he became threatening. I never threatened anyone, David said, his frustration starting to show. All I did was ask if there was a problem. I've been nothing but polite this entire time. Officer Kim exchanged a look with her partner. David could tell they were both experienced enough to recognize the inconsistencies in Beverly's story. But they also had to follow procedure and investigate the complaint that had been called in. David, would you mind if we took a look in your bag? Officer Rodriguez asked. Of course not, David replied, handing over his gym bag immediately. He had nothing to hide. Officer Kim opened the bag and began removing items. Basketball shoes, still damp with sweat. A water bottle. A towel, deodorant, a math textbook, and notebook. Everything you'd expect to find in a student-athlete's gym bag. Looks like legitimate practice gear, Officer Kim observed, holding up the basketball shoes. These are definitely used for playing basketball. Beverly wasn't giving up. Well, of course he'd have props. These people plan these things out. I'm telling you, I saw him testing door handles. Which door handles specifically? Officer Rodriguez asked. Beverly hesitated for a moment, then pointed vaguely down the street. Down that way. I saw him trying doors on at least 2 houses. David shook his head firmly. That's not true. I stayed on the sidewalk the entire time. I can call my parents if you need someone to verify that I live here. Actually, that's not a bad idea, Officer Rodriguez said. Would you mind calling them? David pulled out his phone and dialed his father's number. His dad answered on the second ring. Hey, son, where are you? Your mom's been keeping dinner warm. Dad, I'm sorry I'm late. I'm having a situation with the police in the neighborhood. They need to verify that I live here. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Put one of the officers on the phone, David. David handed his phone to Officer Rodriguez, who introduced himself and explained the situation. David couldn't hear his father's responses, but he could see the officer's expression changing as the conversation continued. I see, Officer Rodriguez said. Yes, sir. I understand. We'll handle this appropriately. He handed the phone back to David. Your father is on his way. Beverly looked annoyed. His father could be anyone. That doesn't prove anything. Officer Kim had been observing Beverly throughout the interaction, and David could tell she was getting tired of the woman's attitude. Ma'am, we've examined the young man's belongings, we've verified his identity, and we've contacted his family. At this point, we haven't found any evidence to support your allegations. But I saw what I saw, Beverly insisted. Just because you haven't found evidence doesn't mean he wasn't up to something. You should arrest him just to be safe. David's eyes widened. Arrest him? For walking home from basketball practice? The entire situation was becoming more surreal by the minute. Officer Rodriguez closed his notebook. Ma'am, we can't arrest someone without probable cause. And right now, we don't have any evidence that this young man has committed a crime. In the distance, David could see another car approaching. It was his father's sedan, driving a bit faster than usual. Relief flooded through David's body. His dad would straighten this whole thing out. His father had a way of handling difficult situations that always made David feel safe and protected. The car pulled up behind the police vehicles, and David's father stepped out. He was still wearing his work clothes, a crisp white shirt and dark tie. Even after a long day at the office, he looked professional and composed. David had never been happier to see him. David, are you all right? His father asked, walking quickly toward the group. I'm fine, Dad. This lady thinks I was doing something wrong, but I was just walking home from practice. David's father turned to face the officers and Beverly. Good evening. I'm Robert Johnson, David's father. I understand there's been some kind of misunderstanding. Officer Rodriguez stepped forward to shake hands. Good evening, Mr. Johnson. We're just trying to sort out what happened here tonight. Beverly looked Robert up and down, taking in his professional appearance and confident demeanor. For the first time since this whole thing started, she seemed a little less certain of herself. But she wasn't ready to back down completely. "Mr. Johnson," she said, "I'm sure you think you know your son, but I saw him acting suspiciously in our neighborhood tonight. As a concerned citizen, I felt it was my duty to report it." Robert nodded politely. "I appreciate your concern for neighborhood safety, ma'am. However, I can assure you that my son was simply walking home from basketball practice, as he does several times a week." Officer Rodriguez looked at Robert Johnson more carefully, and something seemed to click in his mind. He tilted his head slightly, studying the man's face with a growing expression of recognition. Officer Kim noticed her partner's reaction and looked back and forth between the two men with curiosity. "Mr. Johnson," Officer Rodriguez said slowly, "forgive me, but you look very familiar. Have we met before?" Robert smiled slightly. "We have, actually, though you might know me better in a different context." Beverly, who had been standing with her arms crossed, stepped closer to the conversation. She was clearly frustrated that the officers weren't taking her complaints more seriously, and she wasn't about to let Robert's arrival change the situation. "Look, I don't care who this man is," Beverly interrupted. "The fact remains that his son was acting suspiciously in our neighborhood. Just because he has a father who dresses nicely doesn't mean we should ignore what I witnessed." Officer Kim held up a hand to quiet Beverly, her attention now focused entirely on Robert. There was something about his demeanor, the way he carried himself, that suggested he might be more than just a concerned parent who worked in an office somewhere. "I'm sorry," Officer Kim said, "but could you remind us where we might know you from, Mr. Johnson?" Robert reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a leather wallet. From it, he extracted a badge and identification card. "I'm Chief Robert Johnson. I head the police department for this city." The silence that followed was deafening. Officer Rodriguez's eyes widened as he looked at the badge, then back at Robert's face. Officer Kim's mouth fell open slightly. Even David, who knew his father was important in the police department, felt the weight of the moment. Beverly blinked several times, as if she couldn't process what she'd just heard. "Chief?" she repeated weakly. "That's right," Robert said calmly. "I've been the chief of police for this city for the past 3 years. Officer Rodriguez, I believe we met at the community safety meeting last month. And Officer Kim, you were in the academy class I spoke to about community policing, weren't you?" Officer Rodriguez immediately straightened up, his entire posture changing. "Yes, sir, Chief Johnson. I remember now. It's good to see you again, though I wish it were under different circumstances." Officer Kim nodded quickly. "Yes, sir. You gave an excellent presentation about building trust between police and the community." Beverly's face had gone through several color changes during this exchange. First pale, then red, then pale again. She looked like she wanted to disappear into the sidewalk. The woman who had been so confident in her accusations just moments ago now seemed to shrink before everyone's eyes. I didn't realize," Beverly stammered, looking back and forth between Robert and David. "I mean, how was I supposed to know?" "Know what exactly?" Robert asked, his voice still calm but with an edge that hadn't been there before. "That my son has every right to walk through this neighborhood? That he lives here? That he's never committed a crime in his life?" David watched his father with admiration. Robert wasn't raising his voice or being rude, but his authority was unmistakable. This was the side of his dad that David sometimes saw at home when dealing with difficult situations. Composed, professional, but absolutely not to be messed with. Beverly was now completely flustered. "I was just trying to protect the neighborhood. I mean, you have to understand, I didn't know he was your son. If you had known what?" Robert interrupted gently. "That his father was a police chief? Would that have made my son less suspicious to you? Or would you have made the same assumptions about any other black teenager walking through this neighborhood?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Beverly opened and closed her mouth several times, clearly struggling to find words that wouldn't make her look worse than she already did. Officer Rodriguez cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Chief, we responded to a call about suspicious activity. We followed standard procedure, but obviously this was a misunderstanding." "I appreciate that you followed procedure, Officer Rodriguez," Robert said. "You and Officer Kim handled this professionally. The issue isn't with your response. It's with the complaint that brought you here in the first place." Beverly tried to recover some ground. "Look, Chief Johnson, I'm sure you understand that as a homeowner, I have a right to report suspicious activity. I was just being a concerned citizen. And what exactly was suspicious about a teenager walking home from basketball practice? Robert asked. What specifically did my son do that seemed criminal to you? Beverly's earlier confidence had completely evaporated. Well, he was walking around looking at things, and he had that bag with him, and I'd never seen him before. Looking at things? Robert repeated. You mean looking where he was going so he wouldn't trip and fall? And the bag contained his basketball gear, as the officers confirmed. As for never seeing him before, perhaps that says more about how much attention you pay to your neighbors than it does about whether my son belongs here. David felt a mix of pride and sadness watching his father handle the situation. Pride because his dad was standing up for him so effectively. Sadness because this conversation was even necessary in the first place. Officer Kim stepped forward. Chief, would you like us to file a report about this incident? Robert considered the question carefully. Yes, I think that would be appropriate. Make sure to document exactly what allegations were made and what evidence was found to support them. Beverly's eyes grew wide. A report? Is that really necessary? I mean, it was just a misunderstanding. No harm was done. No harm. Robert looked at Beverly with raised eyebrows. Ma'am, you called the police on my son based solely on his appearance. You accused him of crimes he didn't commit. You followed him through the neighborhood while making a recorded phone call describing him as dangerous. How is that no harm? David could see some of the neighbors who had come out to watch the commotion beginning to whisper among themselves. Word was spreading quickly through the small crowd that the teenager they'd been watching get confronted by police was actually the police chief's son, Mrs. Patterson, who lived 2 streets over and whom David recognized from his morning jogs, pushed through the small crowd. David Johnson, is that you, honey? Yes, ma'am, David replied. I thought that was you, Mrs. Patterson said, turning to address Beverly. This young man has been jogging through our neighborhood every morning for years. He's always polite, always waves hello. His father is Chief Johnson, and his mother volunteers at the community center. They're lovely people. More neighbors began to speak up. The older man with the dog confirmed that he knew David by sight. A woman from Maple Street mentioned that David had helped her carry groceries when she'd seen him walking by her house a few months ago. Beverly looked around at all the faces, realizing that she was the only person in the entire neighborhood who had found David's presence suspicious. Everyone else either knew him or had at least seen him around before. The isolation of her position was becoming clear to everyone present. I think we have enough information for our report, Officer Rodriguez said diplomatically. Chief, is there anything else you need from us tonight? Robert looked at his son, who seemed tired but unhurt by the experience. Then he looked at Beverly, who was staring at the ground and appeared to be fighting back tears. I think we're done here for tonight, Robert said. Officers, thank you for your professional handling of the situation. David, let's go home. Your mother is worried about you. The next morning, David woke up to find his mother making his favorite breakfast, pancakes with fresh blueberries. She didn't say much about what had happened the night before, but the extra care in preparing his meal spoke volumes. His parents had talked late into the night after David had gone to bed, their voices drifting up through the house in serious, quiet tones. Over breakfast, Robert sat down with his son to discuss what had occurred. How are you feeling about everything, David? David pushed some blueberries around on his plate, thinking about how to answer. I keep thinking about what would have happened if you weren't my dad. If you were just a regular father who worked at an office or something. Robert nodded slowly. That's exactly what we need to talk about. The reality is that many young men who look like you don't have the protection that comes with having a police chief for a father. What happened to you happens to others all the time, but they don't always have the same outcome. It's not fair, David said simply. No, it's not fair. And that's why we need to use this experience to make things better. Not just for you, but for other young people who might face similar situations. At school that day, word had already spread about the incident. Some of David's classmates looked at him with new curiosity, others with sympathy. His basketball coach, Mr. Williams, pulled him aside after morning practice. I heard what happened yesterday, David. Are you doing okay? I think so, Coach. It was just really weird, you know. I've never had anything like that happen before. Coach Williams, who was black himself, sat down next to David on the bleachers. Unfortunately, what happened to you isn't as uncommon as it should be. But the way you handled yourself, staying calm, being respectful, that showed real character. Your father should be proud of you." Meanwhile, across town, Beverly was dealing with the aftermath of her actions in a very different way. The story had spread quickly through the neighborhood social media groups and local news outlets. By morning, everyone knew that the woman who had called police on a suspicious teenager had actually targeted the police chief's son. Beverly's phone had been ringing all morning with calls from neighbors, some supportive but many critical. She'd received dozens of messages on social media, ranging from people defending her right to report suspicious activity to others calling her actions racist and shameful. Mrs. Chen, David's next-door neighbor, posted in the neighborhood Facebook group, "I've known the Johnson family for 3 years. David is one of the most polite, helpful young men in our community. What happened to him yesterday was wrong, and we all need to do better." The post received over 100 comments, with neighbors sharing their own positive experiences with David and his family. Several people mentioned that they'd seen David walking through the neighborhood countless times and had never thought twice about it. Beverly tried to respond to some of the criticism with explanations about her intentions, but each attempt seemed to make things worse. People weren't interested in her explanations. They were focused on the fact that she had seen a black teenager walking through the neighborhood and immediately assumed he was up to no good. 3 days after the incident, Beverly showed up at the Johnson family's front door. David answered the doorbell and found her standing on the porch looking nervous and uncomfortable. "Hi, David," she said quietly. "I was hoping I could talk to you and your parents." David called for his father, who came to the door with a polite but guarded expression. "Ms. Mitchell, what can I do for you?" "I wanted to apologize," Beverly said, her voice shaking slightly. "What I did was wrong. I made assumptions about David based on things that had nothing to do with who he actually is as a person." Robert invited her in, and they sat in the living room while Beverly tried to explain herself. "I grew up in a very different kind of neighborhood," she said. "I was taught to be suspicious of people who didn't look like me. I know that's not an excuse, but I'm trying to understand why I reacted the way I did." David listened quietly as Beverly spoke. He could see that she was genuinely upset about what had happened, but he wasn't sure if her regret was about her actions or about getting caught. "The thing is," Beverly continued, "I realized that if David had been a white teenager walking through the neighborhood with a gym bag, I probably wouldn't have given him a second thought. That realization has been really hard for me to accept about myself." Robert leaned forward. "What are you planning to do with that realization?" Beverly looked uncomfortable. "I don't really know. I've been thinking about maybe moving away from the neighborhood. People are pretty angry with me right now." "Running away isn't going to solve the problem," David spoke up for the first time. "The problem isn't this neighborhood. It's the assumptions people make about others." Over the following weeks, the incident continued to ripple through the community. Robert decided to use it as an educational opportunity, organizing a town hall meeting about racial profiling and community relations. The meeting was held at the high school auditorium and drew a larger crowd than anyone expected. David was nervous about attending, but his father encouraged him to share his experience. Standing at the podium, looking out at hundreds of faces, David spoke about what it felt like to be followed and falsely accused. "I keep thinking about all the times I walked through that same neighborhood and nobody noticed me," David said. "I was the same person doing the same thing, but on that day, someone decided I was dangerous. The only thing that was different was that someone was paying attention with the wrong kind of eyes." The audience was quiet as David spoke. In the front row, Beverly sat with tears streaming down her face. After David finished speaking, Robert took the podium. "My son's experience highlights a problem that goes far beyond one incident in one neighborhood. We have young people in our community who are seen as threats simply because of how they look. That has to change." Robert announced that the police department would be implementing new training programs focused on unconscious bias and community engagement. He also said that they would be working with schools to create programs that brought police officers and young people together in positive settings. Several weeks later, David was surprised when Beverly approached him at the community center. She had signed up to volunteer with a program that helped kids with homework after school. "I know this doesn't make up for what I did," she said, "but I'm trying to learn. I'm trying to do better." David studied her face, looking for signs of sincerity. "Why are you really doing this?" Beverly was quiet for a moment. Because I realized that I've been living in fear of people I didn't even know. And that fear almost got a good kid in serious trouble. I can't change what I did, but maybe I can change how I think about things going forward. As the school year continued, David found himself becoming something of an advocate for other students who had experienced similar situations. He worked with his father to create a program where young people could share their experiences with police officers in training. The incident had changed David in ways he was still discovering. He was more aware now of how others might perceive him, but he refused to let that awareness make him feel ashamed of who he was. Instead, he used it to help others understand what it was like to walk through the world as a young black man. One evening, about 6 months after the incident, David was walking home from basketball practice along the same route. It was getting dark, and he noticed Beverly working in her front yard. She looked up as he passed and gave him a small wave. "Good practice?" she asked. "Yeah, pretty good," David replied. "We're getting ready for the championship game." "Well, good luck," Beverly said. "I'll be rooting for you." It was a small moment, but it represented something larger. The neighborhood hadn't magically transformed overnight, but people were having conversations they hadn't had before. Kids like David weren't invisible anymore, but they weren't seen as threats either. They were just seen as kids. David smiled and continued his walk home, where his mother would be waiting with dinner and his father would want to hear about his day. The route was the same as it had always been, but something fundamental had shifted. The neighborhood felt like home again, not just for David, but for everyone who lived there.